بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Alright, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to this week's Sheikh and Shay. Today we have with us Dr. Selda Sezen, and she has, mashallah, 3 masters, and she's right now doing her PhD in spiritual care and psychotherapy, right?
Yes, second one.
Okay, mashallah. So first off, we'd just like to start, tell us a bit about yourself, your journey, how did you get where you are right now, and what are you doing?
Right. I mean, I'll keep it short, because I'm old, so and I have a big history behind me. So, but I'll just briefly mention that. And I like education, I like studying, so I call myself a lifelong student. So like actually since we were born, we're learning many things. Like just how to walk, how to talk, and how to like understand life and etc. Right. So, and I know like until last minute, when we were taking our last breath, so we're going to learn how to die, right? So like I know that like learning is a huge journey and all about life. And so I never stopped studying. So originally I'm from Turkey. I was born and raised there. So when I was 26 years old and I came to Canada, so I did my I started actually continued my education. When I came to Canada, I already had my higher education and I did my graduate studies, but I started from scratch here. So being an immigrant, so like in another country, of course, I mean, my journey ending up here was a bit of trauma, I can say that. So because in my time when I was young, when I was studying in Turkey, so the system was different. So it's going to be a bit political talk, but just I'll keep it so concise. In my time in Turkey, so like just like Muslim country, unfortunately, so the Muslim women were not allowed to study in universities with their headscarf. So, and I have been, fighting with the system, like since, university, first year of my study. Unfortunately, I finished my university and I finished my master's and I started my PhD and I worked for the government like 5.5 years or between 7 years. I can't, just anyway, let's not go there. So then, but in all those journey, was all in fight with the government, with the system. So unfortunately, but alhamdulillah, I never gave up my headscarf. And I said, this is my right, this is my education right, this is my religious expression, this is religious freedom, and etc. So but at the end I was kicked out of my job and from the government work, which I was a high school teacher and I was teaching Turkish language and literature. And I had 2 published books. I published my also master and PhD thesis. But at the end, I was seen as someone actually who is breaking the peace of the community. So with my headscarf, so I was just called that my headscarf is because becoming a or it is a political symbol or just a religious symbol. So because Turkey was run that time actually by the leftist government, and the government was following the laïcism, coming from the French, and which in Quebec we still have that dispute, so I'm afraid that it's gonna just happen in Canada as well. So like just I'm praying for that we're not going to have similar experience here, which in the past so it was painfully affected many community members. So anyway, long story short, what happened actually, I came to the point that I could not do anything with my education and keeping my religious dignity and also following my religious practice. I wasn't able to go anywhere. I couldn't go even the sewing courses the government was offering, or just driving schools. I couldn't go with headscarf. So like just with with my practice, or in that practice, the government practice. Anyway, so I applied for, and I got a student visa just to came to Canada, and I started. My study at Algonquin College, and it was 2002 sometime, so way back. Maybe some of you were not born even that time. So I came to Canada, and had quick education, that like how I can get into the country and work, etc. Anyway, in 4 years, actually, government asked me to come back to Turkey. Because with the new government, with the conservative government, so we're pardoning the people, just inviting them back to their job and etc. I went to Turkey after maybe 10 years later, but just to accept their pardon and then get my old rights, because I was a government worker, and I had that like 19 years of experience and etc. And anyway, at the end, but I decided not to stay there. I got my rights, and I'm already dual citizen anyway.
Mhm.
So I continued studying here, and I did my study at the University of Ottawa. I started my master's in communication. Then actually I decided to study in history, so I came to Waterloo, Wilfrid Laurier University, and I did my third master's in history. And I decided actually to change my subject from education history and in social science again, just to more spiritual care and psychotherapy. And I have been doing actually my PhD now in spiritual care and psychotherapy. It is under the Human Relationships program at Laurier University, at the Martin Luther University College. And since 2016, I'm there. In 2012, I'm in Kitchener-Waterloo, like last kind of 10, 13 years, 15 years. I don't know how to count, so by the way, so anyway, so I've been studying, I've been teaching since 2016. I started teaching at Laurier, and I've been teaching some family therapy, postmodern therapy models course, and also I'm teaching theology courses, so which I actually offer the university under the Muslim studies, Islamic studies, so and women in Islam, Jesus in Islam, so theological perspective. So and I'm offering some undergraduate and graduate level courses at the university. At the same time, I continue my PhD. So I have never-ending PhD. I'm hoping that I'm finishing this November. So the thing that actually I took a cancer break. So I had a cancer journey, and I don't mind sharing. Some people actually are quite, reserved in terms of their, health conditions, but I don't mind. So just what happens, happens. So it's life. And, I think we should be facing, those life situations gracefully. So I get used to, I think, just that kind of, big traumas or small traumas. So going through with that, it's just all life, life journey. So just, understanding and doing your best in all those situations, right? So, and I took some time off, so and I'm back to, full-time working. So last 2 years, so after my treatments, radiation and all those low dose of chemo, and so all those side effects, fighting with those. And I had 2 other surgeries, in between, so through the side effects of treatments and etc. So, but I never stopped teaching, but I stopped studying. So at that time, so because it was heavy for me just to, carry them all. But at the end, alhamdulillah, I'm back to, full-time now studying and full-time working. So at Laurier, your neighbor university, which I'm happily, working there as spiritual wellness coordinator, so multi-faith support coordinator, which is a new position that it has been created, and I have been serving and responsible from the religious services on campus. And since 2015, I've been also Muslim chaplain on campus, supporting the students, providing them spiritual support, student, staff, and faculty members. I've been supporting the whole community. like spiritually and also like emotionally, mentally. So that I have been there. So I mean, I'm not clinically doing psychotherapy, at my job. So because I'm not hired as a, like clinically, as a therapist. So, but as we talk about the spirituality, and it's always, just a, subject that like we talk about our emotional wellness and mental wellness. So kind of I combine them all, like so our like as a holistic, approach, and I'm proud that actually I'm supporting my community, and Muslim and non-Muslim community. So like we do have some like students, they would like to know about Islam, they would like to know about some practices like Muslim practices, etc. So I'm happy to guide and support. So I mean, I'm not a sheikh, and I'm not a like how can I say that, like traditionally trained like scholar or some. So but I'm a scholar, so I'm an academic, so I may not know some subjects and some areas like in depth. So but I'm always curious to know, and then ask the experts, so find the experts in those areas. I never claim that I know everything, so but I do my best to learn altogether, and also share what I know. So and thanks for reminding me. It has been a great pleasure meeting with you. So I know some of you. So I served actually like many Waterloo University students in the past and ongoing. So thanks for coming to me, and thanks for meeting with me as well. And thanks for your collaboration. We do many collaborative work also as an MSA. So like so kind of I appreciate your like work over here, and also collaboration. And thanks again for having me.
Jazakumullah khair for coming. And
You're welcome. My pleasure.
mashallah, it sounds like you've overcome so many hardships in your life, and you
Amen.
still, like, I'm amazed, you're still so optimistic
Alhamdulillah.
talking to us. Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. So we have a great, greatest one, like supporting us, with us, and so there's no place for frustration, and no place for, just this sense of helplessness. So because there's always help, so we know that actually he's with us. Allah is with us.
Yes.
So like he's part of the journey. It's not my journey, it's all collective journey, right? So
Yes.
you're never alone. Yes, sometimes actually you feel you're by yourself, but even that moment you remember that, hey, Allah is closest to me, like closer than my vein right over here. So then when you remember that, so like all the shades are going away, and you're just floating on the like on the surface, right?
Yeah. So then, on that note, what do you think? What is the importance of mental health in Islam, and then also, as you were talking about, for our relationship with Allah and other Muslims?
Exactly. I mean, I think Islam is all about balance, and it's all about mental health, don't you think? So because if you don't have mental wellness, if you don't have a mental wellness, and you're not responsible from anything as Muslim, because your mental ability and mental health is important, because you don't have to, like, if you're not mentally well, you're not responsible actually from any prayers. You cannot, like, just health, just by itself is important, mental or physical, just to do your requirements, obligations, or just like you're just being human being, and just why you were sent over here, what you're supposed to do is all about related with your health. If you're physically not health, what do? You cannot, for example, fast, or you're not supposed to, or you were not asked to fast. So why? Because physically you need to be in place to practice that. Mentally, when you're not balanced, when you're not healthy, how you're going to, let's say, be responsible from, but just follow, like just those, what you were asked to do, right, as a Muslim. So that's why, being Muslim is all about, being healthy, like emotionally, physically, socially. So it's all about balancing your wellness, right? When we talk about wellness, it's not just one, like physical wellness or like psychological wellness. Your wellness, financial wellness, your relational wellness, your occupational wellness, your academic wellness, intellectual wellness, right? So like you just, have a lot of layers in that wellness. So we were just sent just to balance all those wellnesses in our lives, right? So from that perspective, it is very important. But on the other side, unfortunately, it was, I think, most, focused area by Muslims, unfortunately. Like psychology, yes, maybe I know that it's coming from very secular, study area, so like secular, like perspective. So maybe the Muslims developed some stigma around like psychology, right? So because what we believe that believers never actually get stressed, never, you don't have, mental illness, because if you're believing Allah, you're done, like you don't have any issues. No, like, I mean, it's not easy just to balance two lives, here and hereafter. As Muslim, it's just so stressful to be someone, you're not just caring here, you're caring hereafter as well. So you're just thinking double, sometimes triple, so from many perspectives, you're trying to, just be here, coexist in many situations as Muslim by yourself, right? So, and considering that, yes, it's stressful. It doesn't mean that actually Muslim cannot, get stressed. Or just how about the tests and trials in the lives, nobody promised you actually everything's going to be great. You're going to be just living in just rose gardens. Or life is going to be so easy, everything's going to be in front of you, so, ready because you're a believer, right? So considering that, so life is all full of, tests and trials or surprises or just up and downs. So like, and it is not easy, it's stressful. Every up and downs requires balance. When you're up, you have to learn how to be up. When you're down, you're just, trying to be just how you're going to come to the balance, right? And which is normal, which is okay. Why? Because if everything is same, and it means something is wrong. Like listen to your heartbeat. If you have beep 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 beep, it's a sign of life. But if you have one beep, your ex, so you're done, right? So that means that actually, yeah, life have those, up and downs. Fine, it means that you're alive. It means that actually you're in the game, right? You're not done. So just be ready, be aware of that. But unfortunately, from Muslim perspective, sometimes I'm so appreciating, like the new generation. So you're so open-minded than our generations. So that stigma, that taboos around this, mental wellness, mental health, or, therapies or psychological, like support or emotional support, mental support, it is not same. I really appreciate, and I'm so grateful the new generations are so, into that, so aware of that. So, I mean, open to discuss those, and also not just discussing, also asking some support when they need it, right? So because in my time or in my generation, so like it is a shame. Like, how come you can say you're depressed? Like, it means that actually your iman is weak. You cannot just get depressed. So because if you believe in Allah, it means that you cannot, like just, be sad or just, have emotional breakdown or this and that. So, but it doesn't mean just being Muslim doesn't mean that actually you're not being human. It doesn't make you unhuman. We're still human. We still have those, all those systems in us that like, we get sad, we get, like afraid, and we have fears, we have, capacity. Some, like in some situation we might be so strong, some situation we may feel weak. It's all just being about, just human being. So Islam is not asking us, forget about like being human. It's asking us, hey, balance that. It is okay. You have support. You will get over that. If you're, facing those, it means that there is shifa and healing on the side. In Quran, Allah Ta'ala he says, right? So if there is a illness or disease, so I can't remember just exact the word, but he's saying that he creates those with the shifa the next to that. So if you have like emotional struggles, it means that emotional support is there given to you, and it's time to seek, time to work, time to make an effort to that, right? When you have coughing at your chest, what you do actually, hey, I need to do something, I have to check like x-rays or just go so, right? And when you have a ongoing headache, hey, something is wrong with this. It's same that mental health issues as well. I mean, mental health is not about also mental illness. Sometimes when we talk about the mental health, we always talk about the mental illnesses. But mental health is also about staying mentally stable, right? And strong, and have that mental, emotional strength, cognitive strength, right? So I think this is very important, and it's just in the center of like being Muslimness, and it's all about our about our spiritual strength, and also it is so related with the purpose of life, meaning of life, because when you're unhealthy, what happens? Life becomes meaningless. You lost your center. You lost why you're here. Think that you're going through a heavy depression or anxiety. Like, what is going to be so meaningful for you? Well, while you are not, ready to get up out of the bed, right? Even make yourself come over here, for example, just to meet with your community, or just, help yourself, just to boost your, potential, or, explore your own potential, etc., right? So, and it is so in the center of like being human, being abd, being a person who has a purpose in their life. Because when we lost our meaning of life, when we lost the purpose of life, like, where is your Muslimness? Where is your, what are you doing here all? What are we doing here all, right? So I think that's why this is the era that we need to really focus on our mental wellness more than any other time.
Yeah, that's very important.
It is.
So then on that note, like, how do you tell when you need to go seek help or therapy? Because there's that stigma, there's that fear of, oh, is there something wrong with me? Or
Right.
it's just like some people might hesitate to take that step because sometimes they feel good, sometimes they feel worse, and they just can't tell.
Exactly. I mean, I have two answers for that. So one is clinical answer, like, and one is the balance answer. I'll call it. Clinical answer is that, like, in the field of psychology, if you have been noticing some changes with you in your behaviors, in your thinking pattern, in your actions, and in your like emotional stability. So if you have a change, and that change interfering your daily routines, let's say you're a student, what you have like courses you need to follow up, you have, let's say, your daughters and sons, or just children of a family, so you have chores at home to do, or just you're expected to do, or you're working, right? So in those like regular routine, so if you start having some difficulties that like you cannot complete those, like before you were able to do it, you were able to complete, and you were able to like reach, just, or function. So, but in those functions, when you have some, changes, like negative changes, lacking, or, so, and they last 2 weeks. So as a period of time. So if it lasts 2 weeks, it means that actually you're going through something serious than you assume. So, let's say you have difficulty to, get up in the morning. I mean, if you have difficulty to follow up, let's say your routines, your messages, like let's say you keep forgetting charging your phone and you cannot follow up, even just charging your phone like on a regular basis. Of course, if there isn't any other issues, like so, like I'm just talking about the behaviors. Some behaviors are interfering your daily functioning and daily life and your relationship, your responsibilities, your work, right? So then it puts you into a situation that, hey, something is more serious than what you see. It's not about neglect. It's not about forgetting that. It's not about. It's more than more than that, right? So, I mean, I'm not very fan of the diagnosis. So, but yes, we do have some diagnosis that like we need to follow up. I mean, just or talk about. But in general, when you said that actually, when we will understand that. So, like it's all about knowing yourself, and when you know yourself, when you know your normal self, like balanced self, so you will be able to tell that like what is going on, like with you, or something is going on with you, and you will tell yourself, hey, it's not normal, it's not me, I wasn't like that before. If you're talking about that, and it means that like there are some changes, but sometimes those changes are not like negative. Sometimes maybe you're growing, you're becoming more mature, maybe your interest areas are changing, so that's why you're not much involving those, but you're involving some other things. So, or your interest areas are changing, so because you're growing, your brain is developing and growing, right? So we're not talking about those changes, we're talking about some negative changes. They are affecting your like self-care, you start disconnecting with just the community, for example. You start, I mean, disconnecting with the God, like, so your relationship with Allah, if it is if you start actually getting distance, it means that like something is happening with you, like you are, what is happening now? I mean, you're losing your balance in the life, right? So it is very important, and it is very concerning. It's very concerning situation. So I mean, I'm not telling you that actually, like, oh, it's something definitely wrong with you. Maybe you are going through something. Maybe, you're overwhelmed with, because of the exams, maybe just the due dates, and maybe, all assignments, or, you have in fight, for example, or not in good terms with your family members, or just your family members are going through something that is affecting you, etc. So you might be going through something. It may not be directly also related with you as well, right? So considering all those factors, I think it is important just to be able to look at yourself and say that, hey, like, just give yourself some time and observe yourself and tell yourself that, like, what is okay, what is not, right? What does those changes you like, what you don't like. So it's gonna tell you if you really need some help or not, right? Or if you need some like support that moment, because those are all the downs and up, like we're talking about again. So when you're down somewhere, you feel more helpless, when you feel more weak, when you feel more isolated, or depressed, right? And distress. So in that moment, you need a little more effort just to climb up, and just just to have that line, and just to get on the road. But remember, on that road we always have up and downs. What happens when you have those moments, those difficult moments, and up and downs? You learn to jump. What I mean, so just picture that up and downs, like those waves. So when you're down, when you get up, you walk, and then you see the hole. What do you think? Oh no, I'm gonna get into the hole again, and then climb up and walk, and then there's another hole. So you say, what you're gonna say? Oh no, we won't, right? What we're gonna do? Hey, there's a hole. I'm getting there. So like I'm just gonna. I don't want to experience again the hole. What do? You get ready, and you have that hole, and you just jump to the other up. instead of, yes, sometimes you may not see those holes, and then you find yourself you just fell into, right? So because you were not expecting something that come up, and then you will catch you when you were not feeling so, strong, or feeling that, strength in you. So you may just get into there, but you will say that, hey, I wasn't there before, and I get up before, so now I'm just gonna get up, climb up, make some effort, and just get up there, right? And continue your road until the next, hole or next up you need to climb up, right? So this is all life. Just be ready, be prepared, right? So, so there, if you notice that, okay, like in that journey, that walk, in that, like the road that has up and downs. So if you feel actually you prepare yourself ready for just, climbing up, or just for jumping up, you're going to be ready for the life. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be saying, oh no, again, I'm just going to fall down. What kind of road I have? I never, have a break and this. And no, this is the life. It's all about life, So it's all about how you respond to that. Because we cannot predict what is waiting for you. So some ways you may, like let's say what road you're taking, not taking, for example, certain time of the day, so if there's a traffic normal. So, but beyond that, you may not know, right, what is waiting on the road for you, and we don't. So, but what we need to do, we need to prepare ourselves, and that mental health, actually, support comes there. So, because I believe that mental health is all about compassion, communication, and commitment. If you ask me, if you ask my interpretation and understanding of mental health. So compassion, that like love yourself, love your creators, respect yourself, respect your creators, understand yourself, understand your creators, why you were created, and etc. Right? So that self-love, self-care. Look, self-love and self-care is not being selfish. Let's separate those. So when you need, like support, when you need help, when you need care, so it's not being about selfish. Look, a Muslim actually should be strong and healthy. Why? Because you won't need others to take care of you. When you actually, experience some difficulties in your life, keep your, fight, and just to make sure that actually you're gonna, help yourself. And so your help to yourself is about also like helping others, because they don't have to take care of you and help you, right? So how important. Look, by taking care of yourself, you're helping your parents, you're helping your family, you're helping the people actually in your life and community who are responsible from you, right? So how important. It's not being selfish. It's just so a noble action and so important action, right? And it's far as taking care of yourself, because it's amana. You have that amana, life, and all, like things, so you have to take care of it. And you are going to make hereafter with this amana. It's not just about this life. Mm-hmm. Also, your next life is at the stake if you don't take care of this life. This like silly body and silly being is how important, how functional, right? And how essential for both lives that we care, right? So, and that compassion that's why actually I believe it's important. And connection, also connecting with yourself. Hey, tell yourself, speak with yourself, understand yourself, right? What I need, what are my weaknesses, what areas I need to grow, what are my limitations, just to be the best me, to be the, just the, best person of me, best mother, best, child, best, student. What is stopping me to be that, right? So then connect with yourself, communicate with yourself about that, and connect with your community. So because if you don't have good understanding of self, believe me, you won't have that better understanding of the community. Because when you have your issues with you, you cannot be good with others. Right? So that connection is important, starting from inside to outside. I'll actually extend the perspective also. Let's say as a student here in this community, if you have a good interconnection and communication between Muslims, as Muslims, sisters, brothers, and from different cultures, from different denominations, right? So what's going to happen? We're going to have a better communication with with the external also community, right? So in terms of our representations, in terms of our friendship and etc., right? So or connections. Or when you are a good here as Muslim community, you'll actually be a great or sister brother community to Laureate Muslim community, for example, right? So then that's that internal wellness, internal connection, internal communication, how important, right? So I've seen someone there.
Yeah, thank you. So just bridging off what you were saying about what you go through and how you bring that out to the external world and that. I had a question. I saw that you also did family studies and children therapy.
Oh yes,
right?
yeah.
So I was just wondering if you could touch on this. If there's any practical tips too, if you could mention any. The question is how to not be overprotective to either a sibling or a child, where you want to share your own experiences, but you don't want to project that on them. And usually, a lot of times, out of love, you do project it out to them, but
Right.
you want to keep them to do their own decisions, but you want to tell them what you learned in this life. So, what are tips to be a good older sister or brother, and then or a mother or father, where you're sharing your experiences, but you're not projecting it onto them?
I see. Thank you so much for that question. May I answer that question after my third C?
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So because it's going to be more related with that. So the third one, we said first one was compassion, self-compassion and understanding the most compassionate one, having that, relationship. And connection, having, knowing yourself, understanding yourself, and having that healthy connection with yourself and also with your, Allah, who created you and for a purpose, or just to find your, purpose of life, that why you were created, why you are here. We're all here for same thing, but also all here for something else. Because we're all differently created. We are, attributes, our, traits are different than each other. So according to that material, according to that capacity and potential, each of us have strength and have some expectations. I mean, we were asked to complete some task here. So yes, at the end, or in the center, it is about just being abd, right? So understand the purpose of our life, but in that the small pathways or the other pathways, we do have our own functions. Like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says that we are like a body, and so how in a wall each brick actually has different function, just creating that whole body. So eye has different action, function, and our hands different function. So considering that, so we're all completing a whole, right? So considering that, so finding that purpose, finding those strengths and focusing on those is going to make that great connection, and they all gonna bring the mental health. See that? And the last one was the commitment. And remember that it's a journey. And what Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says in one of his saying, Hadith Sharif, he says that this worldly life is nothing for me. I feel like I'm a traveler, resting under a tree and waiting to continue to my road, and I will continue my road. So in that journey, like it's a spiritual journey. We were created as a soul first, right? Then we were created, just had that physical body, that journey with the spiritual body. Now experiencing that physical journey with these limitations, with this limited eyesight. Time to go for you. Coming back. So right, so it with those all experience in this body, so we have our journey. Then what happens actually, we'll have like leave this body bodily experience and just go back to barzakh, have that like bodiless time. Then we'll have our immortal body. Look at that journey, in and out, in and out. So like we're just all going through those, right? So it's a whole journey. So it's just over here. It's like Prophet Muhammad said that, like we're just sitting under the a tree, under a tree's shade, and we'll continue our journey. So but in that short time, we'll also make our hereafter. That's why, yes, it is not end of the life, but it is just important just for the make sure that our hereafter is also in a safe place. So the commitment is important. That's why my last C for mental health. Commitment is important. So we'll make sure that we'll take care of ourselves. We'll take care of our our community, and ones actually who needs us, our support, our well-being, our support to their well-being, right? So we'll be just here for each other, for whole humanity, not just for people, for animals, for plants, for for our environment, right? So this is why we were created, and so not to disconnect with the nature, and stay connected with the nature, because healing comes from nature in many ways. So we are responsible as human beings. Just if we're talking about that general wellness, we cannot ignore that ecological wellness, right, in our lives, and or just the importance of that in our lives. And the commitment again, so committing yourself and committing to like your creator, and just having the commitment to your community. Believe me, it will keep you connected with yourself, with others, with life, and with hereafter life. So how important, and I cannot highlight enough. So, and I would like you leave you actually here with that 3 C's, inshallah, in your minds: that your compassion, your connection, and your commitment, inshallah. So I can answer the questions, maybe if they're related with. So can I take a couple of questions, then come back there? Yes.
Question you mentioned, commitment and connection, and you brought up a lot of points about how the commitment part states like committing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the connection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then you said that mental health is kind of you notice patterns, like you're kind of degrading. You're moving away from your usual stuff.
Right.
So how can you attribute that to mental health? And how can you tell the difference between mental health and like a lack of iman? And you said like it's far to take care of ourselves and make sure we're healthy and make sure our well-being is good. How
Right.
can we attribute one to mental health? And how do we know that it's mental health and not a lack of iman?
I see. Thanks so much for that. So, I mean, quickly, let me answer that before just I move to the, sister's question. Yes, it is very important. So, and it is sometimes inseparable. You may not know that because we don't know, like some struggles. We may have some spiritual struggles. That spiritual struggles actually come out to life, affect your life, like mental or emotional. By the way, actually, I don't know what time I'm supposed to be finishing. So I'm at yours tonight. So like, let me know when I'm, like, what is my time?
We haven't monthly typically, but I feel like there'll be more questions.
I mean, yeah, let me know that, like, how you would like to. So I apologize, I didn't ask at the beginning. So I just asked the starting time, so I didn't ask the finishing time. So
We'll break for prayer about 9:05.
Awesome.
If you're able to continue, maybe people can ask you questions on that side of
Of
Friday.
course.
Just, you're our first female speaker.
Okay, of course. Sure, sure, my pleasure. So we have kind of 20 minutes for the Maghrib. So then I'm good to go. So answering those questions. So let me know if I need to stop. Let me stop. So don't feel, just shy or just embarrassed to say that, hey, Salda, time is up. We don't want to hear anymore. So like, feel free about that. So yeah, sometimes we may not, understand that. Sometimes we use that like interchangeably, like our, weakness in our, strengths, for example, in Iman, and also like just some symptoms we show, like it might be, like same with the depression, right? So it might be hard to distinguish them sometimes. But what we know that if you notice some changes and, what is helping you to feel better, right? So it is all up to, what you're doing, in that situation. So first of all, let's remember that as Muslim, I mean, that's my experience, and I'm thinking that actually it is same for many Muslims. So as a Muslim, like, in the center of my life, my spiritual wellness is so important. My spiritual wellness is not just one part of the wellness wheel. Like in psychology, we talk about the wellness wheel. So that well, actually, we have, your emotional wellness, your mental wellness, your social wellness, your occupational wellness. They all have the little piece, like pizza pies. They all have the piece from that pie. But as Muslim, my spiritual wellness is the whole pie. And yes, I do have other wellnesses in it, but being Muslim, my Muslim identity is whole, like in all areas. I'm socially not feeling well, for example, or my, let's say the job I'm searching for myself is, related with my faith too, because what I would like to do with this life. So then how I'm going to make the decision about like what job I'm going to do and what I'm not going to do. Or, I took once actually 10 of my friends from here, from different faith traditions, women, they call themselves alpha woman. I mean, like just they were so, I mean, they were, how can I say that? They were in their field, and they're like CEOs, or so like they were all like in very well like positions. So as a career, so and it was 2015 sometime, like almost 9 years ago. So I took them actually to Turkey. So we just visited, Istanbul, Izmir, Cappadocia. So like had a like touristic, places. And also I took them to the places that actually we had, what's called that, those like spiritual places, like Rumi's, places. And so like some other important, Islamic, figures or scholars in Turkey. So, and what happened, like we were just so exhausted, just the weather or traveling, having domestic flights in Turkey and etc. So at the end of the night, they were all going and drinking out, like so. And they were saying that, oh, Selda, we're so sorry for you. I said, why? Because, we drink and we get comfortable, we're just all like loosen up, and so but you can't, like so, and because you're Muslim, you're not drinking, I wasn't joining them, they were coming, drunk or so, whatever. So I don't see them or what they have been doing. But anyway, so, but I was saying that, like, if I drink, I'm going to get more stressed because I believe that, like, so I'm doing something I'm not supposed to do. So because like my way of being, my understanding of life, my, like, the things that brings me comfort is different than what brings you comfort, right? So that's what I'm saying, that, like being Muslim, just my identity is in the center of my life and, related with everything. I cannot just go out and hang around with friends at the bar and just feel better, or just, making a, friend and feel better. So this is different then, right? Or, you know what I mean? So what I'm saying in short, that my groundwork or my identity, religious identity is so embedded with all other, identities or other wellnesses in life. So when it comes to your, connect with your question, so yes, some areas I might feel like weak, mentally, when I feel, weak or overwhelmed or frustrated, or emotionally when I feel not strong enough, and or spiritually when I actually feel that, I don't have strong connection with God to overcome some difficulties, or, just overcome the life situations. So yes, I may not be able to, say that where is it is coming from, right? So because my identity is all about also about my connection with God, with this earth, with my being here, like my meaning of life. So yes, and from this Islamic and spiritual perspective, we know that actually Allah has some attributes, right? And those attributes sometimes, have reflection on you, right? And some days you pray, like you're flying, right? And you want to actually do it just so it comes from your heart, and it's just you cannot stop, like enjoying, like having your sujood, and like having, like your prayers or fasting. But some days you may feel that you're dragging yourself to the prayer mat, right? That's not same sometimes. Like your heart sometimes feels so heavy, sometimes so like light, right? In terms of, doing your responsibility. Some days actually you just so joyfully do your assignment. Some days of just cursing that, like where the damn assignments just came through, like how am I going to do that? So it's same. It's just all about being Muslim. It's not about, like, oh, you're just a bad Muslim, or you're not good. Your iman is not good, right? So let's not, get angry to ourselves, and then notice those, and then what helps me, just to be better, right? What helps me actually to, so the commitment is important for us. Because even if you like it or don't like it, you have to submit that assignment, don't you? Even you enjoy or not, you have to submit that assignment. Even if you like or not, you have to do that prayer. Even if with joy or just with heaviness, you need to do that. And when you continue, that commitment is going to help you to blend them all and balance it. Because let's remember that when we talk about the balanced well-being, it is also not to not to pathologize yourself. Oh, something is wrong with me, that now, like I have to, take medicines or so. So, but on the other side, there is a clinical, response to that. In some cases, it's not in your hand, because your neurological, being and your, neurodiverse, structure or self is there, not you. We're all different in terms of like we are all, have the same maybe brain, system, but that system is not working same. We have that neurological diversity, and understanding that is important. They say siblings in one family may act differently in certain situations. You may say that, hey, they eat the same meal every day. They were raised by the same parents, but like they're so different, right? We are created very uniquely. So then neurodivergent or different neuroplasticity also affect your responses to life situation. It may be, needed some like clinical intervention some point. Sometimes actually, like lack of your lack of your magnesium, like selenium in your brain, or zinc. So you may experience that, okay, I cannot sleep, I have a sleep disorder. No, you're just lacking on some, for example, some maybe vitamins, or let's say lack of iron just makes you, let's say, heavy or slow down, right? Just you feel a bit of, like depression symptoms, but it's not actually depression. It might be just lack of iron maybe in your body, some cases. What I'm saying that, I mean, in some cases you may need, clinical intervention and, checkup, and maybe sometimes, let's say you have, high anxiety, and that anxiety maybe is coming from like some, your not diagnosed, autism spectrum. Maybe you're just one part of that functioning spectrum, but you did not know that. Maybe that your, brain plasticity is, putting you into that situation. So understanding that is important. How you're going to train your brain, how you're going to support your brain, how you're going to understand yourself. It's about the connection with yourself again, like come to the self-awareness, self-understanding, self-empowerment, right? So respect yourself, understand, hey, fine, like I'm having difficulty in these areas. It's okay to have some difficulties in sometimes or some areas, right? Then how I can help myself, how I can support myself in that case, right? So yeah, it's sometimes, come out as a antidepressant. Sometimes lack of, like iron, that you need to have an iron pill. Sometimes it's magnesium that you need to support that, because our brain is like a chemistry lab. It all works with those hormones and chemistry. It's just like a chemistry lab, right? So then it's all about the balancing, right? So then when you work on that, it's going to help you also in other areas as well.
You mentioned the understanding of oneself,
Come back.
understanding these psychological principles and how it benefits your relationship with Allah. I think, and partly because of the modern preaching and modern preaching that we have, many people, I think men especially, have a very anxious relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a very guilt-ridden one.
Yes.
How do you
Or shame-based. You're so shamed. Oh no, I'm so, like not good in, like this and that. So like,
how do you even approach addressing that in someone when this is a lot of what is apparent to them from what is taught, maybe textually or
right.
from, like, especially with men, and
Right.
with the stigma you mentioned earlier
Yes,
as well.
right. Yes, you cannot show your emotions. It's weakness. You cannot say that actually you're depressed. Oh, it's just lack of your iman. So how you can say that? Or you have to be strong always, like this and that, right? So I know, like just being man or woman, like, or if you show your emotions, you're weak, like, so you're not strong. Like just go pray more, then you're gonna be more strong. No, like you cannot solve your problems just praying more. I mean, just having like nafila ibadat. Yes, it helps you. Instead of crying, you're praying. Like instead of maybe screaming at your husband, maybe you're just reading Quran. So it changes the behavior, but it doesn't solve the problem. You have a relational problem with your husband, so like you have to find some other way than reading Surah Al-Fatiha. Yes, it may calm you down, make your voice, but or Surah Al-Fat, like, so it helps you, like, of course it's important. So that's what I'm saying, that like being Muslim is all in the center of our lives. Those practices, those rituals, those prayers are helping us to strengthen ourselves. But it doesn't stop the problems around us. It doesn't, yes, it may, like with your donation sadaqahs, like we prevent some, maybe the, bigger problems. We believe in that, right? So, or, like those prevent, because those like sadaqahs or nafila ibadahs prevents the bigger musibat, right, in your life. So we believe in that. But on the other side, so it doesn't stop the life that's going to happen to you, right? So then, we have to be, ready for the life, whatever it brings. Of course, it's not easy. I'm not saying that it's an easy road. And you cannot just always smile every difficulty. You cannot smile always toward every difficulty, right? So, and you may not welcome always every guest, and it is all about, training yourself, loving yourself, forgiving yourself when you make mistakes. It is okay. You don't have to be strong always, right? It is okay. You can make, mistakes and ask forgiveness. It is okay. You learn. It's okay. You can make same mistakes, and then like maybe you're not learning, first three roll, and then maybe you're okay to learn on the fourth one, fourth mistakes or whatever, right? So we all have our potential and capacities. If you would like to have a happy life as Muslim here, so first let's understand ourselves and accept ourselves and know our limitations, know our strengths, and know our areas that like we need to grow, and then balance it all, right? I know it's just easy here to say that, but we know that actually, when we have the difficulties in life, what it is asked to be patient. And when, as Muslim again, like giving the same, example that like maybe my friends actually feeling strong when they're actually, investing into their addiction, but Allah is guiding us. When you have hardship in life, come to me, he says. He says, turn to me and ask me with patience and with prayer, he says. Namaz, right? Salah. With salah and patience, ask help. Or if you would like the happiness and satisfaction in life, what he says, your heart is going to be satisfied only what? With zikrullah, remembering him. So how you remember? Are you remember Allah with prayer? Do it. With fasting? Do it. With zikrullah? Do it. With reading Quran? Do it. You have many ways. With the walk in nature? Do it. With loving kids? Do it. Respecting elders? Do it. Or donating your time, doing volunteer works? Do it. Whatever is making you, like feel better, close to Allah, do it. Right? And continue on that. Show commitment. Again, maybe every time you're not going to be so patient with the elders and then do volunteer work, for example, around elders. Maybe that time you will be more like going into your corner and reading Quran, reciting Quran, or studying Quran. Maybe it's going to be fine. Those wellness practices may change. Maybe when let's say in these years, maybe you feel more, let's say fasting is more helpful to me, I will fast. Or, praying my, prayers on time with jama'ah is like more important and I can do, and then it's helping me, do it. Maybe in 2 years, you're going to find that peace, that serenity, that support in another practice. Because you're changing, you're growing. Maybe 5 years ago, what was actually giving you joy when you do your, responsibilities is different than now. It doesn't mean that actually you're weak. It means that actually you're changing. You're growing. Your strengths are changing. Maybe you should be, like exploring that more, and, practicing, finding some ways that will be more meaningful to you. For example, to feel better, right? So yes, spiritual wellness and our mental wellness so related to each other, so embedded sometimes. It's just sometimes so hard to distinguish. And that's why your connection with Allah is so important, because whatever your problem is, what you say that, hey, we don't say that I have a big problem. We say I have Allah with me. I have the biggest one, the most glorious one, most compassionate one with me, who is with me with this journey. Look, I don't actually focus on the big problem. I focus on the big support. So that makes that problem so little. I had once actually, I'll give you one example from my life. I had one social worker friend, colleague, called me. She was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago. She said that, Zelda, how did you do that? You actually never actually complained, never, said anything, or, just continued your life. You didn't know even you had cancer, you know, like just going through a cancer journey. And so I'm so afraid of that. I don't want to die. And so like we have, I said, okay, calm down. I understand that. It's not easy. It's so traumatizing, life-threatening, like just so there's always, hikmah, right? So we know that there is a hikmah, not knowing when you're gonna die. Otherwise, like you're gonna count your breath, like you're not gonna make it through, right? So Allah makes us, not to focus that or just distract us with other things so we don't focus on the day we're gonna die, right? Otherwise, what's gonna happen? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says that if you know what I knew, you wouldn't, have a smile on your face even. So like how serious things are, waiting ahead of us. Like we really do not know. It's not a game, it's not a joke, right? So not knowing sometimes is a blessing, right? We say that ignorance is a blessing. So and anyway, but of course that the cancer trauma, what happens? Like there's something coming up, like now they're gonna tell me how many years I have left, or just how many days, months I have left, so right. And but what I told my friend, sister, and said to her that, look, I know it's hard, I know it's difficult, I know like we're not ready for that, like like you cannot say, it's just so hard to say that I'm ready, like hey, take me, like so it's not ready, it's not easy, I mean, just to say that. But on the other side, I said, look, you're not gonna die because of that cancer. I said, you're going to die because your time is over. When your time is over, you're gonna die that time. Now, cancer is your guest, or just whatever you call it. So like it's with you right now. Yes, it's going to, predict or just, identify your life quality. So at some level, so whatever is like your disease or what, level cancer you have, etc., right, stage. So, but you're not going to die because of cancer. Maybe it's just going to be the reason, that like it's going to making you ready or getting there, right? So what I'm saying in short that, like your understanding of life, your relationship with God, Allah, is so important. It changes whole perspective. And then she stopped and said that, you're right. So I don't have to, afraid of the death right now. So now I said, okay, what you need to do now? And she just answered it actually. She said, okay, now I need to know how am I going to deal with this? What am I going to do with this, so right now. So, right. So it's all about that. Life, our all well-being and all wellness is all about how we are responding to the life, with, pitying ourselves, or with getting angry to self or to others, or just, like it's all about how you're responding. So it requires some training. It requires some emotional wellness training. It requires emotional wellness support, spiritual support. When I'm not using sometimes the word of spirit, or spirituality, but I know at the beginning, and I said, like just it's already in the center of our lives in all areas. I don't have to specify, right? So as I said that, like my emotional well-being, is so related with my connection with Allah, my, like terms with Allah. So, right? So, or I feel good, emotionally good, when I have, like when I'm following my rituals as Muslim, so like when I do my ubudiyah, like properly. And so it, makes me, emotionally strong, for example, right? So I'm not distinguishing, my Muslim identity from my, like all wellness areas. That's something. So is it related with, or just we're taking break?
I was just going to say, if you want to
answer sister's question. So, I mean, if I understood right, so it was a bit of wide question. So you were saying that as a person, how am I going to respond, like to other people? Would you mind actually just reframing your
Like how do you share your experiences, let's say with a younger sibling or like their child without projecting to them
Yes,
that experience. Like it comes out of like being overprotective,
I
or
see.
like things that you've been through. Like let's say someone has like had trauma or just something really negative towards something,
Right.
but they don't want to pass that on to their child. How can you like? Still have
I
that
mean, are you talking about the generational traumas that like to stop that chain, like
Yeah, it could
Yeah.
be that, but like also on a lesser extent.
I see. I mean, there are now like very like popular therapy approaches lately. I'm sure in the social media sometimes you see that, like generational traumas. I mean, yes, it is a reality, and sometimes those healings offers, sometimes they talk about the trauma passed from mother to like grandparents to children, from children to so yeah, like we are all connected, right? So you cannot deny that actually you're disconnected with all those and nothing is affecting you, etc., right? So but on the other side, Allah gave us will, limited will, but gave us a will, right? So there are some things in life that we can control, and there are some things in our lives that we cannot control. So, right? So knowing that limitations, and also we know the fact that if Allah says be, it happens. So, right, we do have that magic key too, like so around stuff. So, and it doesn't require any, connection or any. So he creates his reasons, or sometimes he creates without the reasons. So knowing that, is important for us in that stage that you're asking, or just in the situation you're asking. So because, you cannot educate the people or help people sometimes by sharing your experience. Yes, that experience is important and so unique for you, and you learn through that way, but not everyone will learn the same way. We are so unique in terms of our understanding of life, our responses, our strengths, and our weaknesses. We really do not know if it makes sense to others, right? But on the other side, I really appreciate that effort that like you're trying to pass that experience, because you do not want your siblings, your young ones are coming, so going to have the same difficulties and experiences. Yes, you share them, not impose them, but share with them in the right time, right situation. So because when you're not in good terms, for example, with your siblings, if you try to teach them, oh my, they're gonna refuse everything that comes to you. Even if you say that, hey, this is Jannah, this is the stairs, you just take that stairs, you're gonna find yourself in Jannah, they're gonna say no to you, right? So because you're not in good terms. So like just we are all emotional beings, like so you cannot just ignore that, right? So in a right time, in a right situation, in like so right way, that you'll find the way that like how you're going to communicate those, right? So, and it is important how you're saying, what you're saying, when you're saying, right, who you're saying to. So they're all those like considerations that you need to keep in your mind. So but and also when you're telling them, hey, this is just my experience, but I really don't know if it's going to work for you, like it's just like being therapist. I call it actually like therapeutic approaches. We all need to be trained. Wallahi, I'm saying now, we all need to be trained on those therapeutic approaches to be a good person, first of all, good colleague, first of all, and or good human beings, and good daughters and children, like good workers. So because if you have those like therapeutic approaches and then know that, like practice those, is going to make you actually better in your relationships. It's going to make you better in the life, because we're not living in a cave. We're living in a society. So we're always in contact and connection with others. So we need to know ourselves, our biases, our strengths, and again, like our weaknesses and our, like areas that, like our limitations and etc. Then, how are we going to turn those information into social skills and social relationships, right? So that's the area that actually is so important, what you're asking, that it is so important to know yourself. It's so important to know who you're living or speaking with, and finding the ground that you're gonna make it's what you're saying is gonna make sense to them, right? And sometimes actually we talk about that, like knowing who you're speaking is important, also knowing like who you are. So because sometimes you cannot just let's say you're calling your brother, hey, come over here, so he doesn't listen, he's not like looking at you, you're just calling him, but he doesn't hear you, like say, so he cannot come. But sometimes what you do, you go next to, you just get the attention, you get him from the arm, come this way. But first you have to go to them. First you have to understand, you have to go to them and be there and look where you're inviting them from there, and then see what is on the road with them, actually difficult for them to walk there, like while you're calling, so because just only calling is not a thing, like it's not, doesn't work sometimes, because it just works for you that I told you so. At that point it just works, it satisfies yourself, and because you told them, like so. But it really needs to make sense, or you need to understand like where they are first, then you're gonna come up with some, it's like a therapy. You see, actually every time when I'm with someone and supporting, I see what they need. But I cannot tell them like, hey, if you do that, like it's gonna, because I don't know what is gonna work for this person, what is important, or what is the importance of that for that person right now, what is that person's priority right now. I don't know what is on the road is gonna actually stop him or her to come there, or them to come there, right? So first, we have to, just understand where they are, what they have, what's your capacity. Let's say we have a big hole on the road. We need to maybe work on their jumping skills that they're gonna jump over, or we need some support. Hey, we need a bridge. We need to build a bridge first and to get over. Or in some cases, maybe just there's no place we can invite them. Maybe we'll just work over there. How are you gonna be happy to be there? You're not going anywhere, so you're there. Let's say you have some limitations. You have like neurological diversity, and that's not allowing you to change. So how are you going to accept yourself as who you are? You're stuck there. Or how are you going to feel not stuck there, not accepting yourself, and like doing whatever you're supposed to do, right? Or not blaming yourself, shaming yourself, or getting angry to yourself. Oh, I can't do it, right? And knowing your like limitations, right? And being happy what you have, what you were given, etc. It's deep, it's not easy to teach someone, or it's not easy to tell someone, like what is important. But you can say, yeah, it is important for me, it affected me, and I was, impacted by that this way. But the rest is, yours. I hope you don't have it. I hope you'll make it easy. Or maybe it's gonna be nothing for you, For some, like mosquito bites is just one bite and just you don't feel even. But for some, it's just 3 days, adventure that it gets, your skin depends on, like your skin and your body and how it responds as well, right? So something like that. I hope I was able to answer your questions.
Those were really good points. I thought.
Okay. Thank you so much. It's Maghrib time. Let's pray.